Richard Ramirez. His father beat him with fists. His cousin handed him photographs of dead women and told him it was the most exciting thing in the world. Richard Ramirez was born in 1960 in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children born to Mexican immigrants. His father was a railway laborer and a violent alcoholic. The rages were random and brutal. He beat his oldest son so badly that the other children hid under beds. Once he got so angry that he reached for a gun to shoot Richard. One of the brothers hit it just in time. When Richard couldn't take it anymore, he slept in a cemetery. The dead couldn't hurt him. His father had tied him to a crucifix in that same cemetery as punishment. He was just 10 years old. By 12, Richard found the one person who gave him attention, his older cousin Mike. Mike had just come back from Vietnam. He showed Richard Polaroid photos of women he'd abused, tortured, and dismembered overseas. Bodies tied to posts, severed heads, ears worn as necklaces. He taught the boy stealth tactics, how to move in silence and kill without hesitation. He told him that there's no thrill like a good kill. Richard didn't look away. He actually said later that the images excited him. On May 4, 1975, 15-year-old Richard was standing in Mike's kitchen when Mike pulled a gun and shot his wife in the face. Blood sprayed across Richard's chest. He watched her collapse. He watched her die. He went back to that house weeks later. He stared at the dried blood on the walls and realized something. He liked what he saw more than any normal person should. After the shooting, everything accelerated. He dropped out of school, started using LSD, started breaking into homes, started hunting animals in the desert at night, gutting them, and feeding the entrails to his dog. By the time he was 22, he had moved to Los Angeles. By 24, he was the Night Stalker, breaking into homes after dark, abusing, torturing, and murdering at least 15 people across California. In court, he raised his hand with a pentagram drawn on it and shouted, "Hail Satan!" He was sentenced to death 19 times. Ramirez died in 2013 on death row. Cancer killed him before the state could. His body was never claimed. No one came for him, just like no one had come for him when he was a boy sleeping among the graves. Aileen Wuornos. Her father was a child molester. Her mother walked out before she could even remember her face, and the people who raised her were worse than both of them. Aileen Wuornos was born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Her father, Leo Pittman, was a convicted pedophile and diagnosed schizophrenic. He hanged himself in prison when Aileen was 13. She never met him. Her mother, Diane, was 16 when she gave birth. By the time Aileen was 4, Diane had abandoned both her children without a word. No forwarding address. No phone calls. Aileen and her brother, Keith, were adopted by their maternal grandparents. She didn't know they were her grandparents. She grew up believing they were her parents. Her grandfather, Laurie, was an alcoholic who humiliated her before every beating. She later said he abused her for years. Her grandmother knew, but she did nothing. By 11, Aileen was selling herself at school for cigarettes, food, and spare change. Not because she wanted to, but because no one was feeding her. At 14, a friend of her grandfather assaulted her. 9 months later, she gave birth to a boy in a home for unwed mothers, and she was forced to give him up. A few months after that, her grandmother died, and her grandfather threw her out of the house. She was just 15 years old. She lived in the woods near her old home, slept in abandoned cars through Michigan winters. She survived by selling her body on the side of the road. She attempted suicide 6 times before she turned 22. Nobody came for her. No teacher, no social worker, no neighbor. By 1989, Aileen was working as a prostitute along Florida highways. Between November 1989 and November 1990, she shot and killed 7 men, all middle-aged motorists who had picked her up. She claimed they had abused or tried to abuse her, but the jury didn't believe her. She was sentenced to death 6 times. Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. She was 46 years old. She skipped her last meal, and her final words were barely coherent. Something about Jesus, a mothership, and coming back. Her ashes were scattered under a tree in Michigan, the same state where her mother left her, the same state where no one ever came back. Pedro Lopez. His mother sold herself behind a curtain, and her children listened from the other side. When her 8-year-old son became what that house made him, she threw him out and never looked back. Pedro Lopez was born in 1948 in Tolima, Colombia, the 7th of 13 children. His father was murdered 6 months before he was born. His mother was a sex worker who operated out of their one-room house. A thin curtain was all that separated her clients from her children. Pedro grew up listening to what happened on the other side. At 8, His mother caught him behaving inappropriately toward his younger sister, but she didn't get him help, she just threw him out, dropped him at the city's edge with nothing. No food, no money, no goodbye. His first night alone, a stranger offered him shelter, but he took him to an abandoned building instead and assaulted him. Pedro spent 2 years homeless in Bogota, begging, starving, and smoking cocaine paste to ease the hunger. At 12, an American family adopted him. He thought it was finally over. Then a male teacher at his school assaulted him. He managed to steal the money and ran back to the streets, the only place that never pretended to be safe. At 21, he was jailed for car theft, and just 2 days into his sentence, 4 inmates abused him. This time, Pedro didn't cry. Instead, he made a knife and killed 3 of them in 2 weeks. When released in 1978, Lopez started hunting young girls, indigenous children, street vendors, and daughters of the poor. He lured them with coins and candy and committed unspeakable crimes. He strangled them slowly, watching what he described as the light going out of their eyes. He buried them in groups and dug them up later to have tea parties with their bodies. When police caught him in 1980, he led them to the graves, 53 bodies, girls aged 8 to 13. He claimed over 300 across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Lopez was sentenced to 16 years, Ecuador's maximum. He was then released in 1994 and declared sane in 1998 and was set free on $50 bail. He visited his mother one last time and asked her for money, but she had none, so he sold her mattress on the street and vanished. No one has seen Pedro Lopez since 1999. The boy his mother threw away at 8 became the most prolific child killer in recorded history, and he's still out there. Richard Chase. His mother believed she was being poisoned. His father beat him for being strange. Then they stopped giving him his medication and let him go. Richard Chase was born in 1950 in Sacramento, California. From the outside, his household appeared middle class, Presbyterian, 2 children, a quiet suburban street. Inside, it was very different. His father regularly beat both children, while his mother grew increasingly paranoid, convinced her husband was trying to poison her. She sought psychiatric treatment twice before Richard turned 13, and the arguments between his parents never stopped. Richard Chase showed warning signs early. By the age of 10, he had begun killing cats, setting fires, and wetting the bed. The 3 behaviors psychiatrists later labeled the McDonald triad, often cited as early indicators of extreme violence, but no one intervened. By his mid-teens, Chase was heavily abusing LSD, marijuana, and alcohol. He suffered from impotence, a condition that humiliated him deeply and once caused him to break down in tears at a party. A psychiatrist later suggested the problem stemmed from intense, suppressed anger, possibly directed at women. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. Chase became convinced his heart was shrinking, his blood was turning to powder, and parts of his body had been stolen. He shaved his head to watch his skull bones move and pressed oranges against his temples, believing vitamin C would absorb directly into his brain. In 1976, he was hospitalized after injecting rabbit blood into his veins. Doctors diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. The hospital staff nicknamed him Dracula after repeatedly finding him with dead birds and blood around his mouth. He was later stabilized with antipsychotic medication and released into his mother's care. Then came the decision that would cost 6 people their lives. Believing the medication made her son too docile, his mother slowly took him off every prescription, without consulting a doctor. But within weeks, the delusions returned. Chase began killing dogs and drinking their blood. In December 1977, he bought a gun, and over the following month, he murdered 6 people. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death. On December 26, 1980, Richard Chase was found dead in his cell at San Quentin. He had secretly hoarded antidepressants and swallowed them all at once. He was 30 years old. The detective who investigated the case later wrote, "Richard Chase ended up being poisoned after all, by his own hand." Ed Gein. Ed Gein grew up believing one thing above all else, that the world was evil and women were its greatest sin. His mother told him that every woman on earth was evil, that the world beyond their farm was a pit of corruption, that she was the only person he would ever need, and Ed Gein believed her. He was born in 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin, the younger of 2 sons. His father was a violent alcoholic who regularly beat both boys. But it was his mother, Augusta, who truly controlled the household. Fanatically religious and obsessed with divine punishment, she spent afternoons reading her sons the most brutal passages of the Old Testament, stories of death, retribution, and God's wrath. She taught Ed that women were instruments of the devil, that sex was filthy, that desire itself was a sin so dangerous only she could protect him from it. She punished him for trying to make friends. She kept him isolated on their remote Plainfield farm and told him she was his only family, the only person he could trust. Ed never dated, never held a real job, never stepped out of his mother's shadow. His older brother Henry tried to escape. He began dating a local woman and openly criticized Augusta, warning Ed that she was destroying their lives. In 1944, while the brothers were burning brush on the property, the fire spread out of control. And by the end of the day, Henry was dead. Ed calmly led police to the body. Bruises were found on Henry's head, but no formal investigation followed. When Augusta died of a stroke in 1945, Ed was 39 years old and alone for the first time in his life. He sealed off her bedroom, leaving it untouched and perfectly preserved, while the rest of the house slowly decayed. What followed was a descent into obsession. Ed began robbing graves, selecting women who resembled his mother. He took pieces of their bodies and fashioned them into objects. He wasn't trying to destroy her memory. He was trying to become her. Between 1954 and 1957, Gein killed at least 2 women. When police finally searched his farm, they uncovered a house of horrors, evidence so disturbing it shocked even seasoned investigators. Gein was found guilty but declared legally insane. He spent the remainder of his life in psychiatric institutions, described by staff as quiet, polite, and soft-spoken. He died in 1984 at 77 years old. You may not recognize his name, but you know what he inspired. Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. 3 of horror's most terrifying figures, all drawn from the same source. A quiet farmer whose mother taught him the world was evil, and who never stopped believing her.